Welcome. I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, The Gospel According to John, an encounter with grace and truth. Today we'll be talking about lesson 9 of our study, which covers the Gospel according to John, chapter 7, verses 1 through 53. In our last lesson, we wrapped up the Feast of the Passover, and we had a little bit of drama there at the end between Jesus and a number of his followers. As we set all that up, remember, it was very notable that Jesus started in Jerusalem for this feast and then left and completed the discourse around the feast, not in Jerusalem. And now we see again, and will remain typical in the Gospel according to John. Most of the action we talk about centers around these brief periods where Jesus is in Jerusalem for feasts. So in this lesson we see, first we see what Jesus been up to since the Feast of the Passover. He has been not in Jerusalem. He's been instead wandering about Judea and Galilee, where he's from. Why? The text tells us really openly he's not hanging around Jerusalem because at this point he's already created enough tension with the Jewish leaders that they are looking to kill him. So he's spending most of his time not there, and he's explicitly been spending time in Galilee, where he's from, which will more or less where he's from. In John's Gospel, of course, he's from heaven, and John doesn't care so much about where earth Jesus is from, cares much more about where heaven Jesus is from. But that will nonetheless be relevant here, and it's, of course, the same Jesus. So we've got a feast here as well, Feast of Tabernacles. This sounds a little, the name tabernacle can make this sound a little solemn and can allow us to miss what's a tabernacle. The word tabernacle just means tent. It sounds fancier, and especially for us, it creates the association with the thing that we keep the hosts in when we're not using them, and that gives it a solemn sense that the feast doesn't have. It's a feast of tents. Why tents? Because it's a commemoration of when the people had been wandering in the wilderness and the fact that they finished. And everybody for a brief period of time sets up tents again and hangs out in them. And that helps them remember the time when they were wandering in the wilderness. So we're moving to another feast. It is again a feast where Jews were supposed to go to Jerusalem to worship, which will also be an important thing here. So there's our setup. It's another feast. So John's Gospel focuses around what happens with those feasts. Jesus has not been there, and Jesus' kin or family that he's been spending time with are challenging him to make himself known publicly as if he hasn't been, right? That's a thing that will come up even much later in the gospel when Jesus is ultimately on trial, is this contrast between, is he working in secret or is he working openly and in public? And although they might here be suggesting, don't hide yourself away, he hasn't been. He is going to Jerusalem, and he is openly teaching and working. And he has very good reason for not being there all the time. And we'll see ultimately what happens when he does hang out there too much. And he definitely knows that. But the suggestion that Jesus is acting in secret seems a little bit absurd. Because he definitely has shown himself to the world. We'll dig in a little bit to what's behind the nature of this challenge and some of this interplay here as we progress through the chapter. at the heart of this challenge, then, we saw Jesus' brethren basically saying, you should make yourself known to the world and not hide away what you're doing here in secret. We see a few things. First one, John straight up tells us that challenge is coming because they don't actually believe. They don't have the faith that we're looking for people to have in Jesus. That is the main, as we've seen throughout the gospel, the main challenge of an encounter with Jesus is, are you going to accept him with faith or are you not? And that faith allows you to see beyond Jesus the person to Jesus God. It would be much harder if you saw Jesus as a little kid growing up to see past who he is. So, the whole prophet is without honor thing is not explicitly mentioned here, but the idea is contained that people who saw him grow up are having a harder time with the idea that they're not seeing his divine origin. They've seen so much of his human side that they have an even harder time accepting or seeing past that to the divine than someone who had never met him before. If he just shows up into Jerusalem with big talk, working signs, and you've never heard of this guy before, it's a little easier to say this is a miraculous new thing than if you've known him for 30 years. And you say, oh yeah, that's just Jesus. So a little bit you can understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, totally not, because he has been working in public and he does have this reputation already. The thing they're challenging him to do is what he's been doing, which makes it kind of a weird challenge. And it really is kind of a prove it sort of thing. And done not with the hope that he proves it, or the expectation, but just kind of as a means of challenging and potentially taking him down a peg. Like, if you were really such a big deal, you would go to Jerusalem and you would do exactly the things you have been doing. But we're going to disregard the fact that you have been and just say that you should again, even though it's dangerous for you. There are lots of tendencies and places where I think we do things like this. When someone is, big examples, a couple of them. One, if somebody who has been eating badly and is overweight, starts eating better and making progress, initially their friend group may very well encourage them, support them when they say they're wanting to start trying. But it's not at all uncommon if that person actually starts succeeding for the dialogue around that to shift. And it starts to make other people feel uncomfortable about the fact that they're not. And all of a sudden it's, I'm not sure you're being healthy about that. And this is bad. And it's not coming from the person who's actually succeeding is making good, healthy decisions, but that all of a sudden challenges and makes other people uncomfortable. Similar situation, I have stopped drinking entirely. And it comes up in social situations, why aren't you drinking? It's okay all the time, and it was okay when I drank too much. People barely ever challenge that. But heaven forbid you don't do something like that, because then it becomes threatening to people. And when we feel threatened by something like that, and I've done it to people too often myself, then we start to push at them and poke at them and challenge them to make ourselves feel more comfortable. That's what's going on here, I think, is there's maybe no ill will or malice on the part of these people who know Jesus, but they're being forced to see him in this different context of basically something like a prophet, and that doesn't register at all with them. And it makes them very uncomfortable, especially the challenge of who he is. If any of this is true and real in what he's saying, that is a big challenge for them to try to follow. And in the face of that, they're pushing back. They're uncomfortable by that. And the way to deal with that is to push him and to poke and prod at him and to make it so that there's something wrong with Jesus, so that there's not something wrong with them that they have to change. It's really basic human nature, and of course Jesus understood that better than I do, or any of us do. So I'm sure he has no particular hard feelings here, but he's also not going to give in to the challenge, right? Because in those situations, if you give in to the people, you're just allowing them to justify staying in their mindset. You're challenging them, they poke at you. If you give in, then you're saying, yes, you were basically right, and what I'm doing was unhealthy, or yes, it's silly not to drink at social events, or whatever the situation might be. You're justifying and making correct their point of view if you let that get to you. And so instead, Jesus does something, says, yeah, you all should exactly do what you're telling me to do. You're right. We should go to the feast. We should go to Jerusalem for this feast. That's what we do. You need to do that because you're right. But, I'm going to not just do what you're telling me to right now. You should worry about yourselves and not worry about me. So that's sort of maybe the psychology of the challenge going on here a little bit, to humanize a little bit what's going on. And I think we do this, I know I have, unfortunately, with people who are trying, and this may be an even better example, people who are trying to live holy lives as well. I've definitely poked at people who seemed a little too conservative and all in on trying really hard to focus on God and maybe not engaging so much in many of the things of the world because they find them distracting. Similar idea. Why you're not going to see this movie just because it's R-rated, but it looks like a good movie, or whatever things are on Sunday. You can't come hang out with me because it's Sunday. That's silly. All the restaurants are open, so clearly it's fine to go out, whatever. And I've definitely, all those things, it's easy to get uncomfortable, and it's easy to take that out on the people who are doing right for themselves. And so again, Jesus here not taking that bait, but then also explaining what's at the root of it is this idea of being worldly, and of Jesus versus the world is going to be a very recurrent theme. Jesus may be living here now, human Jesus on earth, but he is not from or of the world, right? He's God. And so there is in the person of Jesus an inherent conflict. He is not, especially in John's Gospel, he's not a worldly being. He's human now, but he's from not earth, which is the thing that makes him so different, and the thing that is critically important about who he is in this gospel is he alone and uniquely comes from heaven. And toward that end, he says, you all fit in very well here because you're from the world and you're continuing to want to see things in a worldly way and to act in a worldly way. And that's where the challenge is coming from, is you're getting uncomfortable around me because you're actually getting a sense, a whiff of something otherworldly about me. And what you're doing is you're pushing back at that. Instead of, faith is actually in that, inviting you to go deeper. And you're seeing that challenge. You're seeing that hint of, there could be something better here. There could be something real and legitimate to this. And instead of following that invitation, you're pushing back. And in so doing, you're anchoring yourself in the world, and you're siding with the world against God. So if you want to do that, just keep doing what you've been doing. You should just go ahead and go up to the feast like you're suggesting I should, because that's just, feel free to stay in your mindset if that's what you want to do. But I'm not taking the bait. I'm not going to have any of it. Then Jesus does something that is dangerously close initially to what they were accusing him of. Of course, Jews are supposed to go to the feast for the three, or go to Jerusalem for the three major feasts. So although Jesus has said he wasn't going and didn't immediately go, he's kind of bound by laws to go, and he goes in secret. So what's going on here? They just said, don't hide away in secret, like we double dog dare you to show up to this feast and to make a big ruckus again and show everybody that you really are the real deal. And Jesus is going to be taking the position that he doesn't do any of the things that he's doing in secret, and yet when he heads out to the feast, he heads there initially in private. We'll see how that develops. It is an interesting interplay that right after the conversation about act openly, I do, then he sneaks off. We'll see how all that develops. We don't have enough information yet to see what he's doing. But ultimately, spoiler alert, Jesus doesn't do things in secret. He's just not riding into town on a donkey on this particular occasion. That comes later. And in the midst of all of that, of course, Jesus is a major topic of conversation. Everybody is trying to figure out, who is this Jesus guy? Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Should we listen to him? Should we not? Where is he? It's a big feast. Everybody's supposed to be here. What's going on? And it's a huge topic of conversation. It's the topic of conversation, although kind of hushed. Everybody seems to know the Jewish leaders are not a fan of him or talk about him, which is probably only serving to sensationalize the whole thing and to further make it interesting to talk about. So there's a lot of drama floating around the person of Jesus here. And he is, whether he is present or not, a major topic of conversation and a focal point of this particular feast. So going into this then, important points for setup. We've started by talking about setting up again the difference between the world and Jesus, between things that are open and things that are hidden. And we've set up Jesus as this central and polarizing figure, looked at generally from the point of view of the world. All these people who are talking about is he a good or a bad guy, they're not generally looking at him through the eyes of faith still. They're not looking at, is he God? They're looking at just as a person, is this a good person or a bad person? They're still spectacularly missing the point, even the ones who think he has something interesting to say. And that's where the idea of something being hidden gains so much fascination, and John is working on multiple levels, because of course hidden in the person of Jesus is God, and he's trying to make that the opposite of hidden, right? He's trying to show God to us, and the only way that stays hidden is if we don't engage him with faith, if we don't listen to what he says and see beyond what our eyes show us. So the level of, is Jesus doing anything hidden? He's trying to do the exact opposite of hide. He's trying to manifest in his person God, and he is. And where that remains hidden is where the world clouds our eyes. So that it's not Jesus who's hiding, it's us who are unable to see and to apprehend God in the person of Jesus, which is where you get the irony with the accusation that his family made. They are not able to see God in Jesus. And so for them, he is acting in hiding, but not because of him, because of them. And all of this conversation around who is this Jesus guy that everybody is doing, the same thing is at play. Basically nobody is seeing what Jesus is trying to show. And they're all trying to make him a worldly thing, which is why, in some ways, him hiding, coming into the feast privately, is actually an invitation. He's not feeding into their misperception, and he's biding his time and waiting for the right moment to create the right kind of perception. So there's a lot of layers going on here about perception and how things are seen, and rightly versus wrongly, and that'll all play out over the course of this feast. As John does, now we build on the theme. So, yes, Jesus showed up to the feast in secret, waited for the chatter to reach its peak around the middle of the feast. Everybody's been speculating wildly, where's this Jesus guy? Is he the real deal or is he not? What's going on? And then in the middle of the feast, he shows up in the temple area, and he starts teaching. What does he teach? John doesn't think that's relevant. That's actually a very important point, and it's the thing we miss sometimes in the Gospels, especially John's Gospel. John cares much more about who Jesus is than what Jesus says. From the beginning of the Gospel, we've set that up. Again, Jesus being God in human person makes his person the important thing, not his words. Which is I'm not trying to undermine the value and significance of Jesus' teaching, of course. But he's not primarily a teacher. He's primarily God. And he's not... The law and the prophets before told people about God. Jesus would not be unique if he told, with words and teachings, people about God. What makes him unique is that he is showing them God in who he is. So that, yes, his teaching is of value, and we'll get key points of it distilled that are the things that we're supposed to take away from John's point of view, the core of his message. We have one of those now that he keeps repeating over and over and over again, which is faith. Faith being so important because if we can look at him with that trust, then we can see beyond the veil of human flesh into the divine. Right? We're actually, again, emphasizing that we're supposed to see God in Jesus. It's in seeing and apprehending God that the work of Jesus has been accomplished, not in listening to what he has to say. So John doesn't distract us with a lot of Jesus' teachings. And also John knows that others have written a lot of that down, and he's trying to get into a deeper point. And John's Jesus is not just a great teacher. John's Jesus is significant for who he is at a level that is beyond his teaching. And that's kind of the core of this exchange as well. So we know his teaching is of interest for what it is because everybody is speculating about how he can be educated when he's not educated. How can you teach well and know these things? So we know, in addition to him just being God, so obviously his teaching is going to be good, we know from the crowd's reaction he is a good teacher. And the question that comes up is how? All the rabbis we have who teach us have studied and have been trained and can trace the lineage of their education back to great, wise, learned men. This guy doesn't have the ability to trace his education back to anyone of substance. Oh, wait, John set that up. He does. And that's where Jesus anchors it. He says, no, I actually also trace the origin of my teaching back to someone who taught me. You know him. His name is God. I know it's not a Rabbi who's it, but it's probably better than that. God. And moreover, Rabbi was a coveted position, right? Being a Jewish leader or a teacher, that's a good job. And that's a really good gig back in this time. And it's a good way to build a lot of fame, reputation, glory, honor for yourself. It's a place of honor. It's a place to be sought. It gives you social status. It gives you position. It is a thing people do to seek their own glory. And that's the other point Jesus makes is, you might know people who studied and learned and who talk about God and do so for their own benefit and advancement. I am the opposite of that. My teaching comes directly from God, and I am teaching it to give glory to God, and not to give glory to me. The idea of glory will remain extremely important throughout this gospel as well. I think an interesting thing about the concept is that it's related to how things appear or how things seem. So it's like it's almost the splendor or the marvelous appearance of God that Jesus is looking to show. Again, he is an image of God. You look at Jesus, you're meant to see in its splendor the glory of God, which you can only do when you look with the eyes of faith. But Jesus is tracing then new lineage, God to Jesus, to his teaching, as that is the most direct possible route to where does divine authority come from and how do these people access God. More direct, as Jesus points out, but not in contrast to God, Moses, law, teachers, people. That's kind of the channel that they're used to and that they're relying on. Jesus is claiming to be many degrees more direct and therefore more authoritative. But then he also raises the point, okay, let's talk about Moses then. You're wanting to look at that line of authority and that line of challenge, and you're wanting to find fault with me there. You're not following that law either. And then he's going to dive right into, let's talk about why I am a forbidden topic of conversation, and there seems to be all this dissent and all of this seeking to kill me. The core reason for that is going to shift over time throughout the gospel, but the one right now that they think they've got him on is that he healed somebody on the Sabbath. And heaven forbid you teach somebody you work on the Sabbath, because that's against what Moses said. Right? So we're going to hold Moses against Jesus. And of course, Moses, the law, is the supreme authority. And Jesus warms up to that by saying, well, first of all, you're wrong. God is the authority, not Moses. And that's who my teaching is from. So, if you were really interested in God, you would be able to notice that I'm talking on behalf of God. But let's talk about the law, which came through this human guy, Moses, and, not through me, God, from God. So less direct, less significant, but, he also was comfortable with some things happening on the Sabbath, because there, as it turns out, are higher laws and higher rules than that. Case study, let's look at circumcision. You all are very comfortable doing that on the Sabbath because Moses told you to do that, and he told you to observe the Sabbath, and you have dealt with that conflict by deciding that's okay on the Sabbath. So, there is precedent that it's okay to do some things on the Sabbath, and that's all I did is, that, and that's just a sign, and it's meant to bring someone into union with God. I did that times like 100, but in a similar, categorically not dissimilar, so we should be all good according to what Moses thinks, right? And then the final point is just, you all are, again, appearance, right? You all are judging things by the surface level, by how they look, by appearance and not by substance. You're not seeing beyond what is on this surface level. You're seeing things as the world does, as your eyes do, as a flawed and broken human perception does. You're not looking with the eyes of faith. You're not seeing in me, God. You're not seeing in the things I'm doing an invitation to understand and to know God better. You're choosing to put up resistance and barriers instead of to see past what your eyes are showing you into the divine, which is the point of the person of Jesus. Jesus is still the topic of conversation. This guy who's teaching out here, isn't this that Jesus guy that, we've been talking about for 3 or 4 days? But, what we were talking about is how they want to kill him. And so he's not going to show up because it would be dangerous. And then we were speculating baselessly after that about whether he's a good guy or not. But the thing causing all of that was he is a person of interest. And we were sure he's not showing up. And now here he is. Not only is he here, but he's in the temple area and he's teaching. How can that be? If he were so bad, why are they not arresting him? Because we thought that they're not letting us talk about him openly. Doesn't that mean that, what's going on? And the thing, so interestingly, with the way the themes have been set up, that makes this a point of interest is he's not doing what he's doing in secret. Right? That was the accusation before, is everything he's doing, he's hiding, he's in secret. If he really were the real deal, he would not be doing that. And then he's not doing that. And everybody says, I can't believe he's not doing that. So maybe he is the real deal. That whole healing thing, whatever. But, he has the nerve to stand up to the Jewish leaders. That must be the Messiah, because he's willing to contradict the Jewish leaders. That's not maybe the healthiest line of thinking. The people most challenging to religious authority are the ones most likely to be legitimate. But at the same time, it shows the fact what they're so interested by is Jewish leaders don't seem to feel like they can do anything about it. They're not stopping him. And after all, if this guy weren't the real deal, wouldn't they be stopping him? Second point, we dig more and more into, but this can't be a prophet, because we all know this guy's origin. We know where he comes from. Interesting point. In John's Gospel, do we know where Jesus comes from? Where has John told us Jesus comes from? Only that he comes from heaven. We don't know that he was born in Bethlehem. We don't even know at this point that he is in the line of David and the Messiah. John has not considered that point worth mentioning. Even now, when people are challenging Jesus' origin, he doesn't say, I'm Jesus, son of Joseph, great, whatever, grandson of David, and rightfully king. Because that answer frames him wrongly for who he is and who's trying to be. That traces, even if it's inspired and motivated by God, that traces still a human origin. And John's Jesus is, the significant thing about him is, again, not his human origin. It's his divine origin. And so everybody says, well, we know where you're from. And he says, oh, do you? Where was that again? Let's talk about why I came, because that's the way to answer where I came from. Why I came is to reveal God to you, which I can do because I came from God. Where am I from? Sorry, I can't point to it on your map, because your map doesn't have up on it. It's a flat 2D map, and it doesn't have heaven on it. So I can't point, where on here am I from? Sorry, I can't point to it because it's not there. It's there. You're again attempting to register the discomfort, the dissonance you feel with the things I'm saying and the conflict with how you like to see things. You're trying to anchor that in the world to explain it, right? You're trying to make God into a person, which God did for you, but God did it to drag you as a person toward heaven. And what you're doing is trying to drag and keep God down on the earth and to fit him in what is comfortable for you and for what you can understand. We do the same, well, maybe not all of you. I do the same often. It's an easy trap to fall into. I want to humanize the divine because it makes it easier to grasp and easier to apprehend and easier to understand. But it also makes it wrong because God isn't limited to the way we see things. Jesus wasn't born just in Bethlehem of Judah. Jesus was born from the beginning of time, of everything, from the Father, with the Father, was begotten, not made, one in being with the Father. And that is as much or more who Jesus is than the guy born in Bethlehem of Judah. But we try to make him just the one, right? The tension in the person of Jesus, and now also in our church, is that it's both. It's a mix of the human and the divine, which gives us an invitation ourselves into that union with the divine. But we try to stop at the human, right? We try to stop at human. They tried to stop at humanizing Jesus, and we try to stop at humanizing the church, and not seeing beyond the human side of the church into the divine as well, or of the sacraments. The invitation is to see deeper and to see beyond, to things that come not from earth but from God. So Jesus again tries to make that point, says, hey, you don't know where I'm from. And then they continue to speculate. They don't particularly love his answer. They're not going to, because they're trying to see, again, they're stuck in seeing human Jesus. But they're still seeing, but wait, this still isn't just a human person. We still have the problem of the things that he's doing. So we can say, we're going to anchor you here in this time and place as this guy, and we know where you're from, and you're just another guy, and we're comfortable with that. But the things you're doing, wait, now I can't explain the things you're doing when I've taken you and put you in the context I want you to be in. Now I don't know how to explain what you're doing. Other than, I guess, there's this Messiah idea. Maybe I can throw that label here. And does that make this okay? Does that make me comfortable with this? Could that be what this is? But you, Jesus, aren't saying that. So I still don't understand, right? We can try to... we can try to similarly make ourselves comfortable with things, but it doesn't fit all the time, right? When we leave Jesus in a human way, or kind of even our perception of him, even throwing titles like the Son of God, if we're not actually seeing that, doesn't satisfy, doesn't make us comfortable. So there's still this huge tension of we can't figure out how to account for this guy in a way that makes sense. And then we see there's also this problem of authority. And same general idea, where did he come from, where is he going, comes up with the Jewish leaders who, again, apparently are unsuccessfully seeking to arrest Jesus. And what we don't see is why. Why are they unsuccessful? There are two ways I think we can look at it. One is Jesus somehow is magically able to repel guards and just kind of like poof, disappear and then show up somewhere else later, that seems like itself would be a thing that would occasion comment, or more likely, is political pressure. And I think that'll explain how all of the story progresses toward what ultimately happens as well. You can't really arrest the guy who's so popular that everybody is saying, we think this could be the Messiah. You can't really arrest and kill the Messiah as a Jewish leader because, you're supposed to be waiting for the Messiah. And he's supposed to be the salvation of your people. So when there's still an open question, is this guy the Messiah? You, the Jews, can't take and kill him because he's supposed to be the fulfillment of God's promise to you. The Romans can, but you can't. So, yes, they want to arrest him. They need him to misstep and lose the crowd before they can arrest him. To me at least, it seems like the political explanation makes better sense here than like Jesus has like repel guards magic around him or something. So we're going to kind of look at it that way and see Jesus has power politically just with the open question of could he be the Messiah. So the thing the Jews need to do then, from a strategic point of view, to be able to get rid of this Jesus guy, is they have to discredit him enough that they can grab him and they can kill him. It's very much a situation of needing some taking polling data and figuring out how much power exists. As we're recording this video, we are in the middle of preparing impeachment of our president. And one of the things that will determine how that goes, one of the major things, will be not what's just or right, whatever that might be, but how it polls, right? It's no different now. What the majority of the people end up deciding is the right thing to do, and what that pressure ends up doing shapes what our leaders will end up deciding and doing, because politicians always are answerable to the will or whims of the people. So we're seeing the same thing here. They themselves, the Jewish leaders, don't like Jesus and they're seeking to arrest him. But by seeking to arrest him, they're trying to discredit him enough that the people will side with them when they do it. And right now, they're not there. By saying, don't talk about this Jesus guy, they're not stopping people from wondering who he might be. And so that's why we talk about this open question, where is he from? Right? If you can create a narrative that anchors him and he's just some Galilean and the Messiah won't be Galilean, not the Messiah, no problem, so he's a phony and we can get rid of him, right? They're trying to place him in that context and shape the narrative that Jesus isn't the Messiah. They're trying, and we'll see they try other means of discrediting Jesus to the point that they can grab him. Here they have a short exchange when they, again, are coming to try to arrest him. And now he's not talking about where he's from. He's talking about where he's going. So where you Jews want me going is away or dead. That's going to happen, but I'm going to speak about it vaguely. I'm only going to be here for a little while, and then I'm going somewhere where you won't find me. He's telling them they're going to win, but it's not going to be what they think. And, I'm going away is a little different from you're going to kill me, right? It sets it as when it happens, I'm doing it, right? Like you're trying to make it happen, but no, I'm going to go on a trip. And I'm going to have the power to do that, and that trip is going to be, death. And you're not going to be able to find me again. And you're not going to yourselves be able to come to where I'm going, because while you can die, you can't not die. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to where I came from. And without me, you can't go there. So take that for what it's worth, but you all are still fundamentally missing the point. Where I come from and where I'm going are the same, and they're my business. They're unique to me, and if you could see and understand that, that would be very helpful for you. So tension between Jesus and the Jewish leaders increases, and we're starting to see the strong need of the Jewish leaders to fundamentally discredit Jesus so that they can do what they want to him. So with all of this pressure and all of this tension around who is the person of Jesus, at the beginning of the feast, he's not publicly out and open, still the topic of conversation. As we get to the middle of the feast, now he comes out, starts teaching, and has this first confrontation with the Jewish leaders. And then he doesn't go away, right? We're still in the middle of the feast. All of this is still building and culminating as the feast keeps progressing. And then on the last day, as all of this has built to a frenzy, and it's clear, I mean, at the point that he's come out and everybody's seen him, it would have just stirred everything up even more. Then he stands up and he makes this proclamation. Remember what feast we're celebrating. This is certainly not the only way to look at what's going on here, but I think it is an interesting perspective on it. The Feast of Tabernacles, booths, tents, commemorates the time that the people were wandering in the wilderness. There were a few instances there where the people did not have enough to drink, because, desert, and they're wandering in the desert. And all of that would be on people's minds over the commemoration of this feast. And there was the whole deal with Moses taking the rod and hitting a rock. And from that rock then water flowed out and people had water to drink. They were thirsty, they were wandering in this wilderness, and they were lacking something essential to life. And God, through his intervention, gave them that means to live through the person of Moses. And here Jesus stands up and says, if you're thirsty, right? If any of you wandering around in this life find that you're lacking what is essential and something that you need to live, come to me. And you don't need this whole Moses guy and a rock on the side of a mountain. I can do the same, but to your heart. And so flowing up out of inside of you will be what you need, what is most essential for you to live. I can basically pull a Moses on your hearts and open them up and allow all the water you need, the Spirit, to flow from there. So if you're wandering thirsty and aimlessly through the wilderness of your lives, come to me and I can give you what you need. The Spirit of God. And John clarifies, in case we missed it, he does mean the Spirit of God here. He doesn't mean literally water, in case any of you, my readers, missed that. Remember that thing, back in chapters 3 and 4 where we talked a lot about that. Here, water again is being baptism, right? It's being used as an image of baptism would be that breaking open of our hearts. And he kind of set that up a little bit when he talked about some of what he's doing, and he referenced circumcision in the law of Moses as well, as the point that he's building from just previously. He said, you all will do this anytime. What I'm doing is like this, but more. Now, this living water thing, that is the new circumcision. That's the new thing that he's doing. And so presumably his teaching would have taken a little longer and would have gotten into some of that detail that John doesn't. But that, to me, seems to be where he's placing himself and what he's doing and what's going on here. Is, again, interestingly, he would almost be more like the staff of Moses than Moses in this case, right? He's the thing that would strike at the hardness of our hearts and from that make living water grow or flow. And that is an encounter with Jesus Christ, and that's what baptism opens us up to, and what we're all invited to have now as well. But we also see, and it's also significant here, the power of what Jesus is doing doesn't go into effect while he's teaching. It's a thing that is still pending. So he talks about what he's going to do, but he has yet to have achieved it. And we will talk at much more depth about why that is as we progress through John's Gospel. But just as in case anyone is wondering, one of the key points is going to be, and he was just alluding to it, he has to not only have come from God, but to go to God before what he's doing can reach ultimate fulfillment. It's not just that he dies and rises from the dead, although that is significant. People have risen from the dead prior to this in the scriptures. What is unprecedented and has not yet happened is no human embodied person has ever gone to heaven. A heavenly being has now come down, but what's going to happen in Jesus is a person is going to go up and enter into heaven. And something about that we'll talk about in more detail as Jesus explains it in more detail, opens the way for this thing that's going to change all human people, or provide the opportunity for change for all human people, that is going to be transformative for all of us and will, at the core level, change us and give us life, abundance that has been lacking. So the same conflict, the same response. Who is this Jesus guy then? There are some people who hear what he's saying and say, this is a pretty big deal, and I kind of want what he says he's giving, and I'm kind of siding with Messiah here, right? Which is, John's basically giving us polling data, right? Like, there are people who, when called up, say, do you think Jesus is the Messiah? Some people are saying yes, because otherwise he couldn't be doing and saying the things he's doing. And then other people are buying the narrative the Pharisees are pushing out there. No, he's not, because I know where he's from, and he's not from where the Messiah is from. No, not the Messiah. And we're basically seeing conflict. There's both narratives are out there, and people are uncertain. And again, we'll see Jesus is not working to build. He's not fighting this political battle, right? He's not trying to build the "I'm the Messiah" narrative. If he got called up and pulled on it the way they're viewing the Messiah, he would probably say no also, but for a different reason, because of course also he is the son of David that everyone's looking for, but he's not the Messiah that everyone's looking for. And he is the Son of God, which is what really matters to him. So ultimately then, the challenge we have moving forward is we've got both sides. Jesus Messiah, Jesus not Messiah, neither of which would be how Jesus views himself, and everybody spectacularly missing the point. But this is the environment and the narrative. This is what happens in Jerusalem. It's why we saw from chapter 2, right at the beginning when Jesus raised a ruckus the first time in Jerusalem, him saying, I don't want to side with the people who are saying Messiah any more than I want to side with the Jews, because I don't trust them anymore than the Jewish leaders. From the beginning, his view was neither is right, and I don't want to go on either side. And he's going to continue that throughout his time in Jerusalem and elsewhere. Here we see, I think, a stronger case or example of why it is Jesus can't be arrested. We see from the mouths of the people sent to arrest him themselves that it's not that Jesus has like guard repellent on. They're not coming back and saying, we tried to grab him, but our hands just bounced off of a force field. They're saying, we went to arrest him, but then we listened to him, and now we're not sure it's a good idea, because we know what you're going to do with him if we bring him back, and we're not sure that's a good idea. Even though you're our bosses and you sign our checks, we're not sure that what you have in mind is the right thing. And it's so deeply ingrained in these Jewish people, this wanting the Messiah to return, that thinking this guy could be that is enough to hold them back, is enough to keep these people from doing their jobs, and to say, I don't know about bringing this guy back to the Jewish leaders, because, if he's the real deal, that's not going to go very well. So let's just go back and tell him we're not sure, and we didn't want to. And that'll go over well. To which they say, well, but the Jewish leaders have all sided with not the Messiah, and, we're the religious authority, so that should answer the question. But of course, the fundamental problem we've seen is that it doesn't, right? That doesn't answer the question at all. The people don't have enough trust in their leaders and the authority of their leaders, that they're willing to say, the leaders say this guy's not the Messiah, he's not the Messiah, case closed, no big deal, go ahead and kill him. They're saying, the people are saying, well, you all say he's not the Messiah, but I don't know that I trust you. The Jewish leaders have no actual authority on their own. Religious authority from their point of view all comes from the law of Moses. That's why that keeps being such a topic of conversation. They don't get to say what God thinks. They only get to interpret the law of Moses. And while they might be more trained and educated in interpreting it than the people, what they say by itself carries no weight. It's only helpful as an interpretation, but not as itself authoritative teaching. And so the crowd can disagree. And while the crowd disagrees, again, they don't have the power that they want to have to get rid of Jesus. And when their own lackeys are saying, well, we're not sure, and we don't know that we think you're right, that is a huge problem for them. The people whose checks they sign and pay are going against them in favor of Jesus, which again, from their point of view, would mean we have to get rid of him even more, because look at the amount of power he's taking from them without trying. Again, he's also not saying he's the Messiah. Just his presence and the questions in people's minds are enough to destabilize and delegitimize the teaching and authority of the Jewish leaders, which tells you a lot about how they've been exercising power and quality of their teaching, right? This guy who's not trying to claim those things is taking them just by being, because he's so much more persuasive and appealing than the leadership. Their big problem, and Jesus will point this out, is, if they were working for the glory and service of God, then they would have authority in themselves based on what they're doing, and they wouldn't have this problem that they have. They wouldn't so easily be delegitimized if they were legitimate. The problem is that they're not. And so that'll be Jesus' main point as we continue going through this, is if you guys just acted on behalf of God, this wouldn't be a problem to begin with. Because we'd be on the same team, and you would be as famous as you wanted to be, but you wouldn't want to be because you'd be working for God. The real problem here is you're not, and that is creating an issue. So we'll continue to watch how all of this plays out. Finally, one of the points the Jewish leaders raised is none of us believes in him. Then as soon as the guards are gone, Nicodemus chimes in and said, Nicodemus, the guy who went and talked to Jesus, who definitely wasn't really getting it, but then chimes in and says, okay, but do we really know that this guy isn't the Messiah? Can we talk about that for just a second and entertain the possibility, intellectual exercise, just consider the extremely outlandish possibility that he might be the Messiah, just as a hypothetical. And he also points out, the law of Moses, the thing that we say we're drawing all of our authority from, says that we owe this guy a fair trial, and to hear out witnesses, and to, actually try to evaluate this instead of just, jumping to conclusions. that goes over about as you would expect. And rather than engaging in rational debate about what the law says in regard to how they should treat Jesus, they jump on this narrative that they've trumped up. They say, are you also from Galilee? Right? They're going all in on, we know where Jesus is from, and it's not where the Messiah is from. Jesus can't be the Messiah. We don't have his birth certificate, right? We do things like this as well, whether, however you might think about some of those narratives around our own politicians, we have the same thing that happens where you have a politician that you think is not the right guy and is pulling power away from you. You create a narrative that is, in fact, in the case of President Obama's birth certificate, it's the same narrative, right? It's we don't know where he's from, or we do know, and it's the place that doesn't allow him to be president, or what we think he should be. We're just going to keep hammering that point. Where's his birth certificate? Where's his birth certificate? He's from Galilee. He's from Galilee. We keep hammering that point to try to delegitimize, and we do it in a way that keeps us from engaging in rational debate about the real substance of the matter, which is where Nicodemus goes wrong, is he tries to bring up, can we talk about the substance of the matter? And they say, Galilee, Galilee, Galilee. It's a very old trick, and it's one that's being engaged in here again, and it's political maneuvering. And it's, as Jesus continues to point out, this is not in service of God. This isn't how you serve the will of God, by these tricks and these diversions and these distractions. And it speaks very poorly of the Jewish leaders that they're trying to do that, but they are. And so we've got a couple of different sides here. We've got the people who are potentially seeing Jesus as the Messiah in a way that Jesus wants nothing to do with. Then we've got the people, the Jewish leaders, who are trying to delegitimize everything about Jesus' ministry, are trying to set him up as not the Messiah, and not important also in a way that Jesus doesn't agree with. They're trying to do it to get their power back. The people are maybe just confused, maybe eager for something that's not what Jesus is trying to give them. And in the midst of all of these different threads, there's Jesus who's trying to show people God. And none of these people following any of these narratives are trying to see that. And you've got this small band of people around Jesus who are closer to getting it. And with all of these different narratives and sources of tension and everything, Jesus has to try to navigate achieving what he's really trying to achieve, which in John's Gospel so far is not 100% clear. We'll see it as he does it. But in the midst of all of that, he is expertly controlling all of these narratives. He's keeping the Messiah thing from getting out of hand and carrying him away in a direction that he's not trying to go. He's keeping enough power in that line of thing, in that narrative, and enough popularity that he can't be killed until he wants to be, without feeding directly into either side of it, and still managing to kind of carve a path through the middle of all of that, where he can keep on his message and keep saying what he means, whether people are really getting it or not, which is just an obscenely difficult thing to do. It's so easy to be caught up in political currents and tides like that, and Jesus is staying in control of all of that, which is really a phenomenal thing if you think about it. I'm sure and he's not doing it with, in John's Gospel, he does it with talking, right? He's not like calling down powers from heaven to shape political narratives, right? That's not a thing. He's doing it just through the words from his mouth. He's managing to walk that incredibly tight and thin line. Again, showing divine power, but in a way we're not used to thinking about or seeing it. Divine power as a word of God. It's a fascinating thing to look at. And it, I think, shows us a different side of Jesus than we often see, but a very important one, especially in this gospel. And so the big challenge, if you're the Jewish leaders, is still, we haven't sufficiently delegitimized this guy with our narrative about where he's from. What's our next step? We have to do something else. What can we do next? And we'll see that next. This has been an overview of Lesson 9 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study, The Gospel According to John, an Encounter with Grace and Truth. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.